again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic? Let's do it. What is the most paranormal or unexplained experience that you have ever had? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. My family was living in a house built before 1865 in western Massachusetts. My bedroom had a door that led into another sibling's room. One night, when I woke up to go to the bathroom, when I sat up, I saw a figure standing at the end of my sister's bed. My first thought was that I was seeing things, maybe some crap in my eyes, or it was all in my head. I calmly closed my eyes and rubbed them and said to myself, I'll open my eyes and look up. Whatever I thought I saw will be gone. So I finished rubbing my eyes, and there it was. I stood up saying, hey. Whatever was there turned around, and I swear its expression was surprise. It moved out of view toward what would be the upstairs hallway. I went into my sister's room, and it was gone. So I went out to the hallway, and there was the family dog. It was looking down the hallway, tilting its head the way confused dogs do. Never saw that again. I have a couple surrounding my grandfather. He was a good man, worked hard, loved his family, and had a gentle and warm soul. Physically, I look a lot like him, and our birthdays were only a couple of days apart. We share a love of chocolate cake, and every year when I was a kid, my family would pile into the station wagon and drive upstate with a cake to celebrate our joint birthdays. He would greet us at the door, kiss my mom on the cheek, take the cake off her hands, and then disappear into the kitchen to sneak a taste. He really loved that cake. He also smoked a pipe and had a very particular warm tobacco smell about him. It wasn't unpleasant as far as tobacco smells go. Well, he unfortunately passed when I was a teenager. My grandfather fell, and being the dutiful husband that he was, he attempted to pick her up despite his age. He unfortunately fell too and broke his hip. His body couldn't handle the trauma, and he unfortunately passed away not long after. It's been over 20 years, and I still miss him dearly. Well, as for the paranormal stories, the first was the very next year when my mom was making that chocolate cake for my birthday. She begins to ice it when suddenly her whole house fills with the smell of pipe tobacco. Neither of my parents smoked a pipe, nor did any of our neighbors. Not that we lived particularly close to anyone. She quickly realized it was her dad looking for a piece of cake and laughed, then said out loud, "Don't worry, Dad. We'll set a piece aside for you," and the smell faded away. The next happened some years later. I had grown, moved out, and gotten married. It had been maybe 10 to 15 years since he passed. It was right around my birthday, and I came home from work one day to find a peculiar smell in the house. It was pipe tobacco. Neither I nor my wife smokes, and again, neither do any of our neighbors. No one had been in the house. We had a cantankerous German shepherd at the time who refused to let anyone in the house without first mauling their face off. I was really confused before I realized what day it was. It was my grandfather's birthday. I called my mom to tell her what had happened, and she told me he would have turned 100 that day. I sadly haven't had any more encounters since, but I'd like to think my grandfather came to visit me on his 100th birthday. If heaven is real, I hope he's up there eating some cake. My first job was at a supermarket. I started as a cashier, then self-checkout, and then the service desk, and I would always pick up shifts or stay later if needed. One evening, I was working the closing shift at the service desk, 3 p.m. to 9 p.m. While I was doing the closing procedure, the on-duty manager asked me if I could finish the closing shift at self-checkout since the worker was sick and needed to leave. It closed at midnight with the store. I said yes. Now, the service desk handles all the phone calls, but once it closes at 9, all calls are routed to self-checkout. It was around 11:30 when I started to make the store's closing in X minutes announcements. After I made the second announcement, the phone rang, and it was a call I still have not been able to explain. The phone rings, and I answered with the usual greeting, "Hello, thank you for calling, you're friendly," and stopped midway as it sounded like an old woman crying on the phone. I said, "Hello, ma'am? Are you okay?" She answered by saying, "Why am I so sad?" Which I replied with, "Ma'am, I do have to apologize, but this is a supermarket. Do I need to call you help?" Which she then just kept sobbing on the phone. Then she said, "It's been so long since I've laughed. Could you make me laugh?" Which I replied with, "Ma'am, do you realize where you've called? You've called," and it was like she flipped a switch. Her sobbing stopped on a dime and turned into rage. She sounded so close to the phone now, and was talking so clearly, as if she was never crying at all, and started screaming, "I need to laugh. Will you not make me laugh? Please make me laugh, please." And I hung the phone up. The phone didn't ring for the rest of the shift. My grandma had a house that she adored. She designed every bit of it. She purchased every piece of furniture, wallpaper, etc. from different countries. It took her 3+ years to finish it. She also collected antiques, and the house looked like a museum. People would say she poured her heart and soul into it. She passed away in that house in her room when I was in the next room. I heard her fall on the ground. Since then, I couldn't be in that part of the house. I felt unwell. My dog used to stay a lot with my grandparents, but after her death, we brought him once and he went crazy. He also broke the door trying to escape. Usually he was very nosy and loved going to other people's places, but he wouldn't go into my grandma's house after her death. When I got married, we decided to live in my grandma's house because by that time my grandpa had passed and it was empty. We lived at the other end of the house and locked my grandma's rooms. Even at 28, I couldn't go there. I would start feeling unwell and get chills. We moved to a different country, but I would still see nightmares about the house and my grandma. She was the kindest person in the world, but in my dreams, she was always angry and scary, and her house was too, and it was like they were together. We sold the house last year, and my mom packed everything and sold it. She felt like she needed to constantly apologize to my grandma. Since we sold it, my nightmares stopped, and I feel much better now. You could say it's all in my head, but unfortunately many of the people close to me have passed. My grandma when I was 10, my dad when I was 12, my grandpa when I was 19, and my dog, he was like my child, at 22. I didn't see any of them in my dreams. I wasn't afraid of any of them, although my grandma was the kindest and sweetest of them all. It was only her bed, her room, and her things that terrified me and the dog. I was in the hospital when I bumped into my grandma in the elevator. I asked her why she was there alone and where she was going, but she just smiled. We walked to her room together. When I opened the door, I saw my parents crying. My grandma had already passed away. At that moment, I didn't know how to feel. It was a mix of sadness and fear. My father passed away last year. One item he always said he wanted me to have was a shotgun that had originally belonged to his grandfather. For years, he had this shotgun stashed in the attic. After he passed, I'd gone in the attic to look for it, only to find that it wasn't there. A few months later, I had a dream in which I was talking to him, and I asked him where he had put the shotgun. He told me it was in the closet of a spare bedroom. I called my mother and had her check, and sure enough, that's where it was. Now, it's completely possible that my father had told me that when he was alive, and the dream was little more than memory, but I certainly don't recall that being the case. Well, I'll tell you mine, and I'll be quick. I think I told this story on a post probably 2 or 3 years ago at this point, but it was Christmas Day, the year after my father passed away in November of 2004. So it's Christmas morning. I'm at the cemetery. There's snow on the ground. There's no cars around. The cemetery is bordered by a train track. It's a very nice place. Anyway, I'm sitting there, and I'm pretty pragmatic. I said to myself, "Hey, Dad, is there something like a sign or something?" It's Christmas morning now, mind you. It's probably 8 in the morning. No traffic. Car goes driving by on the service road, the side of the train track, and within 20 seconds of me saying that, the hood of this car flips back and hits the rests against the windshield of the guy's car. Slams on the brakes, gets out, pulls the windshield down, the hood down, gets in the car and drives away. Now, coincidence, certainly. A sign? I don't know. Sometimes we see what we want to, but I think it was him. We used to live in a very old house that my dad's great-grandparents had raised their kids in. Out of 9 children, only 4 lived to adulthood, all dying in the house along with his great-grandfather. Needless to say, the place was creepy as shit. We could never keep the blinds up in the upstairs window that faced east. Grandma said that her dad would always look out that window with his coffee in the morning. One day, my mom and I were alone in the house and decided to do an experiment. We closed all the curtains in the upstairs room and then went outside to look at them. All the curtains were still closed except for the window pointing east. It was open about 6 inches in the middle, enough for someone to look out of. I'm not saying that house was haunted, but that shit was totally haunted. About 16 years old, 20 years ago, I saw a strange object float across the living room between myself and the TV. The best way I can describe it is as a black ball, just smaller than a basketball, loosely wrapped in thick red spaghetti strands. It appeared, floated a couple of feet from my right to my left slowly and disappeared, all within about 3 to 5 seconds. It was nighttime. Lights were on, and nobody else was around, but I saw it clear as day. No clue what it was, never told anyone about it. I'm a graphic designer and should probably render it and share it to see if anyone else has experienced something similar. A few years back, while hiking in western Washington state in a remoter area, outskirts of the Capitol Forest, not near a road accessible by foot, I know exactly where, but I am not comfortable getting more specific. My girls and I, 3 people, saw a large, bigger than a small prop plane, smaller than a 737, ovalish. I would say this was similar to the shape of a Goodyear blimp, but less round in the middle and more stretched. This something came out of the sky, and it disappeared from view into a valley. It seemed white to me, but weirdly hazy or fuzzy. Perhaps it was slightly translucent, misty, or had a silverish sheen around it. It seemed almost blurry, and I will admit my eyes are not what they were in my 20s or 30s. Perhaps this is an artifact of my eyes going. My girls are younger. One said it was white, and the other said silverish or shiny. They have better eyes for what is worth. It almost seemed to just appear out of the clouds. It was a ways away, hard to judge distance in the air, but it took forever to hike to where we thought it had gone. I would guess an hour to an hour and a half. But this was off-trail, through brush. It's slower going to the valley where we thought it went to. Seemingly, it moved quite quickly without any sound we could discern. We never saw it again that day, though we did hike to where we reckoned it landed or disappeared. I've never seen anything like it since. My mother-in-law suffered with lupus for many years before she died. It was really tough on my wife, who had to forego so much of her life to take care of her. Just before the end, somebody had dropped into the hospital and let a budding rose for her on her bedside. My wife and I never figured out who it was, and nobody in the family ever claimed to have known about it. She was sent home from the hospital, as the doctors had pretty well known she was a goner, and they needed the beds. This was a public hospital in Chile. The rose, despite having been sitting there in water for a few days, still hadn't really bloomed. It was kind of slumped over in the vase. But my mother-in-law loved roses, so my wife left it on the table in our living room, just outside her mom's bedroom. It looked almost like it was dead, and I debated throwing it away, but decided to leave it since it was a gift from whoever brought it. A few days later, she passed away in the ambulance on the way to the hospital with a collapsed lung. It was around 2 a.m. My wife had gone with her to the hospital, while I stayed home with our 1-year-old. My wife called me with the news around 3, and while I was on the phone with her, the baby woke up, so I went out into the kitchen to get him a bottle. When I was crossing back from the kitchen to the baby's room, I looked over to the rose on the table, and it had fully opened up and bloomed in just the hour since my wife left in the ambulance. I mean, it was completely open, a huge, massive rose, probably the biggest I've ever seen. I was really freaked out and told my wife, "You're not going to believe this, but that rose just came to life. I mean, literally, it just blossomed." I was stunned. My wife started crying even harder than the little sobs of grief she'd been speaking through and said, "Are you serious?" I literally just prayed, "God, I understand that it was her time, and thank you for allowing me to have such a wonderful mom, but please just let me have some tiny sign, anything to let me know she's all right." And that would have been just a minute or two before she called me, right when the flower opened up. To this day, I haven't really had any type of paranormal or otherworldly experiences like that, but I'm so glad for my wife that she got this little miracle when she needed it most. We still have that rose. It lived for a very long time before it started to wilt, at which point my wife put it in her mom's Bible right atop the print of her favorite verse, where its petals have stayed to this day. I'm not someone who has ever believed in the paranormal, so this is a really weird one for me. Where I grew up is sort of famous for being a prison island. There's a particular historical site that is a massive tourist attraction, and when I was in 4th grade I went there for a school camp. The place is known for being haunted, and they make a lot of money off ghost tours and the like. Even back then I didn't believe in any of that stuff. We were on a historical tour of the prison. The cells are intact, some are open to walk in, and others locked behind iron gates. Wandering along, looking, I suddenly saw something in one of the cells that was locked. It was a completely black silhouette of a man wearing a top hat with an orange light glowing from his mouth as if he was smoking a cigar. Writing that out, it seems like such a child's interpretation of an old-timey ghost. Besides, what would a guy in a top hat smoking a cigar be doing in a prison cell meant for destitute convicts? No idea. But as soon as I saw that, I ran ahead to my class group and dragged back a friend to ask if she could see it. She could, and seemed as freaked out as me. We ran to get someone else, but our teacher told us to stop running around and get back with the group. She and I have talked about it since then, and both dead set on what we saw. She's not a believer either. It's hard to explain because if you ask me if I believe in the ghosts, I would say definitely not. But when I tell this story, I almost get irritated by the possible explanations people offer up. I didn't see a blur or trick of light. It wasn't just some worker. I saw it like I'd see you if you were standing across from each other. It was a completely opaque black figure, with no discernible features other than the shape and orange glowing light. My best guess would have to be that I was just hallucinating with my friend, was just pretending to go along with it, but that doesn't feel right either. For one thing, nothing like that has happened to me before or since. As for my classmate, every few years I bump into this woman, and we always bring this up. She seems as sure about it as me, and is completely normal suburban nurse who doesn't know me very well, and has no reason to keep up the ruse. Anyway, I think that mystery will continue to haunt me, as it were. My ex worked as a scarer at a haunted house, and we went to drop off supplies to the owner one day. The owners wanted to give me a tour, and although I was uncomfortable, I said yes. We were in the living room, and I looked into the mirror and saw an old man in old-timey clothes with a handpipe sitting on the red chair behind me. He looked like he was in a trance state. The owner saw me stare at the mirror and excitedly said, "Did you see something?" I said, "No, well, yes, but it could just be my mind playing tricks." I described the man, and she said, "Wait right here, don't move." She then showed me a small picture of the man that was on the mantel in the other room. She told me that chair was his favorite chair, and he died of a heart attack in it. I'm used to paranormal stuff happening, but I am not used to it being backed up with historical evidence like that. Needless to say, I was thoroughly freaked out that it wasn't just a hallucination.